Welcome to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers with Linda Prio. Will it be possible to remain in my home as I age? Do I feel safe in my home? How do I figure out how much support I will need when my health needs start to change? What if I decide to move into a community instead? Which community will meet my needs now and in the future? Who will play a role in helping me with decision making? Do you ask yourself these same questions? Aging in Place Strategies and Answers can help you gain practical knowledge that will help you create your own Aging in Place roadmap. If you are already a care partner, a power of attorney, or in crisis mode with your Aging in Place strategy, you will learn what you need to know that you don't know. For over 20 years, I have been marketing Aging in Place services to clients and educating families and healthcare professionals in how to put aging in place strategies into place. When you utilize aging in place, you are allowed to choose where you want to live and make those decisions so that you can retain your quality of life. Welcome to Aging in Place Strategies and Answers. I hope that you have already downloaded episode 1 of season 2 called New Year, New You, Defy Your Age, because I mentioned the importance of reviewing your medications with your physician. My guest today is Dr. Hedva Barenholtz Levy, who owns HBL Pharma Consulting. She is a pharmacist and she is also a geriatric specialist and an author who has written a new book called Maybe It's Your Medications. And she also is an adjunct professor at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy. Hedva, thank you for joining me today. My listeners would like to get to know you. Can you share a little bit about your educational and your professional background?
Of course. Thanks for having me, Linda. It's a pleasure to talk with you about this topic that is I'm so passionate about. So my training is a doctor of pharmacy. PharmD is the clinical degree that all pharmacists get currently. So I got my doctor of pharmacy degree from the University of Michigan. I did a clinical pharmacy residency at Shands Hospital in Gainesville, Florida. And the other additional training and education I have is my 2 certifications. I am a board-certified geriatric specialist pharmacist, as you mentioned, and I'm also a pharmacotherapy specialist, big word that just refers to drug therapy. But I take pride in having those certifications because in my work, I interface mostly with consumers, patients, people in the public, and I want them to know that I really go the extra mile to have the knowledge that I need to give them good information about their medications.
That's awesome. Can you share a little bit about HBL Pharma Consulting, what it does, and how you started that?
It's a fun story because it's my why I love pharmacy so much. So I've always had an interest in working with older adults. That somehow started as I was even through high school and going through college, but then the career path of pharmacy finally was cemented, and I had the interest in working with older adults. I came across a unique pharmacy practice model early in my training of a woman who lived in the Washington, D.C. area who worked with adults in their homes. It was the model that I eventually adapted here in St. Louis, and that just planted the seed. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and certainly I knew I would be a mother at some point, and I wanted to have control of my schedule, if you will. So I always say be careful of what you ask for because you just might get it. So I went after my training, and I had an initial job at a community hospital outside of the Cincinnati, Ohio area. My husband and I recently got married, and we relocated to St. Louis, which is where he is from. And that's when I decided to start HBL Pharma Consulting. So it is a small senior care pharmacy practice. I work with older adults and their family members in their homes to provide comprehensive medication reviews. So with that, it means I look at everything a person is taking, their non-prescription, their prescription medicines, and even the supplements that they take. And I do my best to get a sense of even their nutrition, their diet, and physical activity, and that whole picture that makes them who they are and their health and their health milieu. And I provide reports. I review the medications and provide reports that identify potential or actual medication-related problems. So it's a very thorough, intensive process, if you will. And that report goes to the patient and also to their physicians, with their permission, of course, to address those problems, because so many times medications can cause another problem that we don't recognize is a medication maybe at first. So the whole purpose behind what I do with HBL Pharma Consulting is to really reduce or prevent medication-related problems.
Yes, and I bet you have a lot of success stories.
It's been absolutely rewarding, because the biggest comment I get from people is, no one took the time to tell me that. I didn't understand. No one gave me the time. And that's what I make a big point of, that patient education, helping people understand why these medicines are prescribed. And that's where we get into the other issue of prescribing too much sometimes, or maybe it's not the right choice for the person. So being able to, just that aha moment, having people feel more confident about their medicines and knowing what questions to ask, has been part of my success story, I think.
Yeah, and then being able to look at the whole picture. So I hope you caught all the particulars that Hedva just gave about when she goes in as a consultant. She is just not looking at the medications. She has a very holistic, high-level viewpoint that can help her really get a better sense of what is going on with this patient. You know, Hedva, a few years ago, you had a family member that became ill and was hospitalized. And I remember how hard that was on you, that you were still in St. Louis and running back and forth, in town, out of town. You had to cope with being a long distance caregiver. But it was also during that time that Hedva shared with me that the medications that her family member was prescribed really needed to be reviewed when they left the hospital. They also needed to be adjusted, so she became her family member's advocate with their doctor. Many of us have been in situations just like this, but we don't know what to say. We don't even have the words to use, nor do we even pretend to have the professional expertise or comfort level to talk about medications and intelligently that have been prescribed. How did that go for you with your family member? I know you were in your lane for sure.
Oh, it was an eye-opening experience, because the family member had been hospitalized a few times over the course of a month, and it also started with the beginning of this story. I guess in the middle of the story was an outpatient prescription situation too, where my expertise was invaluable. But if you didn't have that background, what is a person to do unless you dig a little deeper and you know what questions to ask? But even so, our health system is set up so that it is disjointed, and the pharmacist, where you maybe pick up the prescription, is not going to have all the information or that geriatric background to comment on, a new prescription, for example. But what I saw with the family member was, especially coming home from the hospital, that transition of care, as we call it, moving from the hospital setting to home, and the paperwork that he came home with was so confusing. There was volumes of pages, and the medicine list was listed 3 different times, but each listing had a different purpose. This is what you came in on. This is what you're going to continue on. This is what your full list is now. And if you don't know what to look for, I could see how confusing it can be. So it was an eye-opening experience. And also, when people come home from the hospital, it's such a delicate time, where I would encourage everybody to get a careful medication review at that time, coming home from the hospital, to we call it medication reconciliation, to line up what the new regimen should be and make sure that everything is needed. Sometimes medicines come home from the hospital that we don't need to continue, and that was one of the situations, one of the medicines that I identified. But also, that's where a lot of errors can occur, where you're doubling up on medicines because you don't realize two different medication names or drugs that are very similar from before the hospitalization and then when they come home from the hospital setting. So all these sources of confusion. But it was an eye-opener of how fragile our healthcare system is when a patient and a family caregiver is trying to decipher that material, which really there's not a lot of support for that at that time.
It's really hard, and I hope you'll replay that part that she just said, because this is where we sometimes are entering the hospital again so quickly after discharge, is because that time has not been spent. So you already have your medication planner set up, and so then you think it's business as usual, but in actuality a lot has changed. So I hope you do take those key points and remember them the next time you are a care partner for somebody who's been in the hospital, because I guarantee you they won't remember what they've been told, and those discharge orders are going to be at the bottom of some dirty laundry, and it will be the last thing that you actually pull out. How do I know that? From working with clients and seeing this over and over again.
It happens all the time.
Now, I am loving being with Hedva because she is just so intelligent, has so much great information to share, and she and I could talk all day, but I want us to get really focused on the questions that she gave and some words that she wants us to learn. And we're going to get started into the meat of what we're talking about today.
Let's take a moment to hear from one of our sponsors. This is Linda Priot, owner of Aging Strategies and your podcast host of Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers. Please plan to become a subscriber to Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers. In addition to premium content, you will also be able to access a mini consult by reaching me at linda.agingstrategies@gmail.com. It's always nice to get direction or guidance when you're experiencing a crisis or you have a particular question that I have not answered on my podcast. Now, back to the podcast.
So in your newsletter that I received, you told me that there's two words that are ingrained in your vocabulary and that you think that they should be a part of my vocabulary as well. What are those two words were polypharmacy and deprescribing. So it's all yours, Hedva. Put your listening ears on, people, because you don't want to miss this.
And you pronounced those words beautifully, Linda. They're mouthfuls for sure. They're mouthful. So I talked about polypharmacy and deprescribing, and I as I wrote, I think everyone should be familiar with these words, and I encourage you to use them in a sentence and try to just put them in your brain. So what is polypharmacy? It really simply means multiple medications, which could be good or bad. Many times we need to take several medications to manage our health. Think about people with diabetes, where often 2 medications, 3 medications might be needed, or high blood pressure. And as we get older, 2/3 of older adults have 4 or more health-related health conditions, I believe is the statistic. So it's and if you think about how any one condition requires at least one medication to treat it, you can see how the numbers of medications add up. So we get to polypharmacy quite frequently. If I were to give a number to it, commonly it's defined as 5 or more medications, but that's just an arbitrary number. What's important is the quality of that prescribing of the medications that a person is taking. And polypharmacy, as I go on to describe, it gets a bad reputation because of the adverse drug effects that often happen with the medications. I mean, obviously the benefits tend to be greater than those risks, but those side effects can happen. So knowing that polypharmacy refers to taking multiple medications and can be and refers also to the harms that can come from taking multiple medications. So what are the consequences? And I address that in my book because it's such an important piece to understand why we need to talk about our medicines and think about polypharmacy. Adverse drug effects are the first main consequence. Certainly the more medicines you take, the chances of a side effect increase. Drug interactions is another important consequence, where the more medicines you're taking, the chances of having a bad interaction that can be important to your health could occur. The other things may not be as obvious, so I think it's important for people to appreciate these other consequences. Cognitive and physical functioning can decline, right? So someone feeling foggy, memory not being quite so good as it used to be, just a little bit groggy in the morning, or a little disoriented, not able to concentrate. Those can look like getting old, which I never want anyone to think, oh, it's just I'm getting old. No, it could be the medication, so you need to appreciate that sometimes those side effects can be subtle, and they might add up, right? A little bit of one drug and a little bit from another drug, and that can contribute to confusion, fogginess, that type of thing. But we also see impacts on the physical functioning. Right. And you've seen this with your work, with
Yes.
watching the fall risk for
Yes.
people. And the goal for all of us, I think, working with older adults in the community setting, is we want people to be able to age in place and not have to move from home. So the ability to be able to still have balance and be able to maintain that independence, that physical functioning, is so important. Multiple medications, that wrong combination has been shown in studies to decrease the physical functioning. People cannot do those activities of daily living on their own as much, even from laundry and shopping to even dressing and taking care of themselves. We also think about the complicated regimens when you take more medicines and those drug regimens. It makes it harder to take the medications correctly. So adherence is the term we give to that, following the instructions. And the more complex the regimens are, that's what makes it harder to adhere or follow the instructions properly. And when we don't take our medicines properly, they're not going to be helpful if you're not taking them, of course. But if you're taking too much or at the wrong time, it can get us into trouble. And the last two pieces I'll mention about polypharmacy and that the negative problems with polypharmacy is cost. The more medicines you're taking, the more cost, right? So I always look for, I want people to find that fine line of taking just the right amount, those medicines that are helpful, but not taking more than you need, because those are unnecessary costs. And there's also costs, those indirect costs of say you have an adverse event, you go to the doctor, there's a cost there. You get another prescription to manage the new symptom, there's a cost there, and it can snowball. You can see that. And sometimes just quality of life, right? Having so many medicines to manage, having an adverse event, maybe having to go to the emergency department because of a serious problem from a drug. All those are the consequences of polypharmacy that I really want to help people avoid. And much of it can be avoided if we know the right questions to ask.
Yeah, that is such a key point, too, because in my experience of going into people's homes, I see prescription bottles all over the place, which leads me to believe that there was a lot of starts and stops. There were lots of new medications put into the regimen. Those were stopped. And I get confused and a little stressed out when I am asked to think through the best way to handle this new regimen for them so that caregiving in the home can take place. So thank you for that. So polypharmacy, what it is and what the consequences could be. All right, now this is where it gets very interesting as well. What does deprescribing mean, and then what are the benefits? So you guys just heard all the consequences, so I think there's going to be a lot of benefits here, so listen up.
Yeah, so deprescribing is I don't want to say it's a buzzword. I think it's a new science area that we're doing more research into deprescribing, and this refers to stopping a medicine or reducing a dose. So just lowering doses or stopping medicines that are harmful, right? So that's important to always think about the risk and benefit of medications. As I mentioned before, the benefit of medicines is why we prescribe them, why they are approved by the Food and Drug Administration, why we have these drugs. But it's the risks that we need to always weigh against the benefit. And as we get older, sometimes those risks are higher a little bit, and that potential benefit is not as great, just because we have more things going on with our health, with our bodies as we get older. So that's where this deprescribing has come to be this area of research, of a way to talk about it among healthcare professionals, because we need to address the polypharmacy problem. We use an awful lot of medications. It's our go-to in this U.S. health culture. Average time with a physician is about 8 minutes is the number that is tossed around. And it's a lot easier to give a prescription than to think about other ways to manage our health. So we have all of those medicines, and deprescribing is the science of looking at what can be removed where the harms are great enough or greater than the benefits. Or maybe a medicine is no longer necessary. Maybe it's done its job and it should have been stopped, and for some reason it was continued, right? So there's lots of reasons where we can look at stopping or reducing doses. And that's the other piece. As we get older, our bodies are more sensitive to the effects of medicines, and we don't clear them. We don't get rid of the medicines as efficiently as when we were younger. So that means lower doses might be appropriate. So that's where that reducing the medicines might be the appropriate adjustment. So it sounds easy, right? Just, what medicines can we reduce doses or stop? But when you get down to it, how do you know a person's going to respond okay if we reduce or stop a medicine? So there's a lot of barriers to pulling back on drugs, and that's where the science and the research behind deprescribing becomes so important, and why I want listeners to know that this approach exists, that deprescribing is possible, because we need to overcome some of the barriers. And what are those? Well, we certainly have physicians who are concerned about harming the patient, right? If you pull back on a medicine, what's gonna happen? Is the disease gonna come back? Is the patient gonna be worse off? So we need to choose the right medicines and do it carefully. You never want to stop a medicine all of a sudden, because that often can lead to worse problems. So we need to know, how do you stop a medicine, and then which medicines, and when is it safe to do it? If you had a history of atrial fibrillation, but it was coming and going, it wasn't constant, and you were on a medicine to prevent the heart rhythm, the fast heart rhythm, for example, but it's been years now, and you're a certain age now. So is that a medicine you can stop? It's hard. No one wants to have atrial fibrillation come back, or seizures, no, right? So but at some point we need to have a better sense of when is it okay to stop certain meds. And I bring up these examples because, one, it's talked about in the literature. It's certainly an area of concern, but it illustrates why it isn't so easy sometimes, right? So there's the research that we need to provide for our clinicians to help them know when and how to reduce, pull back, or stop medications. But the other part of the barriers come from the patients. Mm-hmm. They don't want to let go of their meds. Correct. I've been taking this for 20 years. I'm comfortable with this. It's working for me so far. But a lot of what I focus on is preventing problems. So many people will tell me, I'm doing fine. I don't need a medication review. Everything's okay. But the problem is people change, medicine lists change, and problems can then happen in the future. Why take a medicine that you don't clearly need, or that has some side effects? Why put yourself at risk by staying exposed to that medicine? So the other reason I want to talk about deprescribing is that I want patients to be able to bring it up in a healthcare encounter. Talk to their clinician about, I have a long medicine list, doctor. Do I need it all? Could we pull back on some things? Could we really look at the value of each medicine, and could we maybe deprescribe it? Could we stop it?
Yeah. So you're probably going to need more than an 8-minute visit
that
day.
Yes.
So I've kind of been schooling my audience to say, if you have something longer to discuss with your physician, then you need to have a consultation, and to ask for a consultation visit, and they have to have a reason for doing that so they can bill it appropriately. But it is possible, right, Hedva?
Yeah, and patient rights. You have a right to have this conversation with your healthcare professional. It's your medicines, it's your body, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a brilliant discussion. I hope you guys are getting so much out of this. I know that Hedva, if she presents a problem, she also wants to present a solution. So what can patients do if they feel they're taking too many meds and concerned about that long-term use and possible side effects? In other words, let's move into this tangent that how could they broach that with their physician? Because that's going to be tough. I could see an issue with that.
Yes, and several patients that clearly have definitely asked, how do you do this? They don't want to offend their physician. They don't want to question that healthcare professional. But remember, your concerns are valid. So my main answer is that communication piece. I always tell people, blame it on the pharmacist if you will. Talk to your local pharmacist. There's specialists like myself out there around the country, or you have your community-based pharmacist where you get your prescriptions filled. I always encourage get to know that pharmacist. But certainly when I meet with my clients, they have my report. Blame it on me, right? I talked to this pharmacist who said I should ask these questions about these medications, right? So that might be a way in. But even without that, just to say I'm taking all these medications, I'm aware that medicines may not be needed as I get older like they were when I was younger, and the value of re-looking at my medications, re-prescribing them rather than continuing them always. Just can we look at each one again? Could we take the time? And like you said, you can't surprise the physician necessarily and hey, let's talk about my 20 medications. There needs to be a special time to do so. But I just can't emphasize enough that the person, the patient, the person, the consumer is at the center of their care. Mm-hmm. We call it person-centered care.
Yes.
In healthcare. It drives so many paradigms and approaches to the healthcare we provide. So remember, you are a central person on your healthcare team, and everything really should revolve around you, what your preferences are. And if your preference is to take fewer medicines or to make sure you are taking everything that really is still needed, you have to initiate that conversation. Research also shows that physicians won't necessarily bring it up, the questioning the medications or re-looking at maybe stopping medicines necessarily on their own. The patient, family member bringing it up is the best way to start that conversation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Let's talk about your book, which I was so excited when I knew that you were going to be writing a book. And I saw her at several times during this process. So let's just say it is like probably even bigger than having a baby. But her book is called Maybe It's Your Medications: How to Avoid Unnecessary Drug Therapy and Adverse Drug Reactions. And it has her beautiful name at the bottom of it, and it's all hers. It was not collaborative. So where can people get this, and your website and all that good stuff? We want people to be able to access this book.
Yeah, so I am, it is like birthing a baby, and it's out there for the world to appreciate. And it is traditionally published, so I'm very proud of that. So Skyhorse Publishing is the publisher, which means that you can get it anywhere books are sold. So it's at hundreds of libraries around the nation. I was able to check on that. So if it's not at your local library, please request it. It's at bookstores. I always encourage people to go to your independent bookstore. If they're not carrying it, I can't expect everyone to be carrying it, but they can easily order it in for you, so go that route. But it's also available online, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can go to bookshop.org. I'm pretty sure that's the name of bookshop.org, and access your independence online even, so if you want to order it that way. And I have all those links on my author website, but it's available everywhere. And the goal is to inform people on help get them more engaged in their drug therapy, because just for those reasons I've talked about with you today in this short time, I hope people can understand that we really need to be involved in the medications we take and not just take them without appreciating what each one is for.
Or asking questions. Hedva, At the end of every podcast, I always offer a caregiver tip because you've been in that role, I've been in that role, and we can learn from others. And so, from your either personal experience or working with families, what would be your caregiver tip that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
Just one, Linda?
She told me she has more.
It's so unfair. I would probably, what starts most upstream, I would encourage everyone to know the basic information about each medication. And I'm going to start off by just to suggest know why the medicine is prescribed. That's key, because right there, if we don't know why, then something needs to be looked at. But how to give the medication, how should it be taken, and then to have a review regularly, have a qualified person. I like to say it's going to be your pharmacist, maybe a pharmacist with geriatric expertise. Review those medications regularly, but at the very least know why each medicine is being taken and those correct instructions.
Yeah. And sometimes when people go to the pharmacy, you've got 5 other things on your mind. So you're there to pick up things for your home, and you're there to pick up prescriptions, and you forgot that you left the dog in the car or whatever. You know how your mind gets on so many different things at once, and all of a sudden you leave the pharmacy without asking any specific questions. So I'm always glad when the pharmacist says, do you have any questions about this? And in my head I go, no, of course not. And then when I get home, I miss that window. So sometimes pausing, just allowing ourselves to just pause and focus on what we're doing at that moment.
Being present, sure. My joke, and I talk about it in the book, when you are asked, do you have questions for the pharmacist? Say yes. I've yet to hear anyone say yes. So no. But by saying yes, even if you've been taking that medicine for a long time, you never know, and it gives you the chance to find out maybe is it still needed. But errors can occur that we don't even realize that you weren't following the instructions properly. So say yes when you can at that pharmacy.
Thanks so much, Hedva. It was wonderful having you here on Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers, and I know you got a lot today out of our podcast. Please listen again and look for me wherever you look for podcasts.
Thank you for joining me today. Please remember that this podcast is intended as guidance and not advice. Share this podcast with friends and family who are currently in crisis mode or with people who would like to start developing their own roadmap for aging in place. Listeners, if you would like a deeper dive into a topic discussed during a podcast, please subscribe to Aging in Place, Strategies and Answers, where you will be able to access premium content. Or if you would like to suggest a topic for this podcast, please contact me at linda.agingstrategies@gmail.com. As always, I value the time you spend with me.